आपके अजीम सपूतों ने जान हथेली पर रखकर पाकिस्तान से न सिर्फ दहशत गर्दी का खात्मा किया, बल्कि पूरी कौम अगर आज सुकून और चैन की नींद सोती है तमाम तर मसाइब के बावजूद, तो वो आपके अजीम सपूतों के लहू की ज़कात है। अगर आज कारोबार चलता है और खेतियां लहलहा रही हैं, तो यकीन मानिए कि वो पाकिस्तान के उन हजारों लाखों शहीदों की लहू की बदौलत है कि आज पाकिस्तान में कारोबार और तालीमी इदारे चल रहे हैं। 9 मई को जो यहाँ पे इस मुल्क के अंदर जो दरिंदगी हुई, 9 मई को मैं पूछता हूं कि क्यों नहीं, अगर वाकई पीटीआई को और उसके सरबराह को अगर अपनी गिरफ्तारी से उसको एतराज था, तो फिर पाकिस्तान की तारीख इस तरह की सैकड़ों हजारों गिरफ्तारियों से भरी पड़ी है।
Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Hosana Makbul with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be talking about two very important topics. The first is in reference to the very important day that is going to be observed tomorrow. And it's, of course, extremely important in terms of what has happened on the 9th of May. And in terms of course, the importance and the sacrifices that the armed forces and security personnel have done in terms of safeguarding the motherland and laying down their lives for the nation, and so have their families. The Martyrs' Day is an important day for all of us, and this is important not just in terms of recognizing the many soldiers and brave army personnel and security personnel who have been fighting for the safeguarding of the country for so many decades. It's also important in light of what has happened, the violence that has taken place on the 9th of May, in which the monuments of various martyrs have been disrespected, military installations and buildings have been targeted. And this is important in terms of the way that we have seen all of this progress, also in terms of the way that the consequences of such actions are now being meted out, the way that the value of the martyrs who are so sacred to the country has been undermined, and the way that the public needs to understand the kind of heroes our martyrs have been, and that no one should be allowed to disrespect them and to not appreciate the value that they bring to the country. And so, of course, Martyrs' Day is extremely important in terms of all of that and what has happened on the 9th of May. We'll talk a little bit more about what this means for the country and how so many of our brothers have laid down their lives for this motherland. We're also going to be taking a look at what is developing in the country in terms of the economic situation. We've seen a lot of crisis going on in the country for quite some time now, particularly with regards to the IMF bailout package, which is of extreme importance to Pakistan and doesn't seem to have a lot of time left with regards to this package expiring as well. The options, of course, are there but are limited as well, and a number of economic experts have now been drawing parallels again with Sri Lanka and Ghana and giving examples of how the situation in Pakistan is also deteriorating very fast, and that the situation of a default is likely. However, we've seen that the government representatives, including the finance minister, seems to be saying otherwise, and some experts seem to also agree with him, saying that the situation is still not as bad and that Pakistan will be able to pay off all of its external debt obligations, and this is a situation that is still under control. And so whatever the situation is or how bad the economic matters are, Pakistan will not default. However, we still don't have any news yet of when we're going to be receiving the IMF bailout package, which is going to be extremely important. The finance minister himself says that all obligations of the 9th review have been met. We've also seen that the bilateral engagements, which was an earlier condition of the IMF, has also been there with reassurances from friendly countries like China and Saudi Arabia. But where exactly is the situation currently stalled? And if we are not able to secure this package, package before the 30th of June? What options are there for Pakistan? And then, of course, how are these factors going to play out in the next budget as well? So all of this is something that we're also going to be exploring in the second part of the show today. For this and more, as always, I've been joined in the studios by senior analyst Farrukh Badafi. And Farrukh, we'll start, of course, with the very important Martyrs' Day and the observation and celebration of our heroes, which is so important in terms of the kind of value that they bring and the kind of sacrifice they've done, and it's unmatched. But again, perhaps it seems that this is something that needs to be reiterated once again, appreciated once again, and talked about so that the value is highlighted, as it seems that, especially in the aftermath of the incidents of the 9th of May, perhaps somehow that was shaken.
Right, Sana. I think that it seemed no-brainer that countries that progress actually pay regular homage to their heroes. But and one would have never thought that we need to keep on reminding certain people how important it is to, keep them, the heroes of this nation, the martyrs, in our memory, and also to respect and to highlight their sacrifices. But somehow, after, as you pointed out, after May 9th incident, it seems important that we do it again. Somehow, because most of the war on terror was fought in the fog of war, it somehow seemed that there were people who kept on obscuring these sacrifices, and for a long time, before especially APS Peshawar, in this country there were many who would actually obscure the facts and then keep on suggesting that somehow terrorists were not the enemies and somehow the sacrifices were not that great. But this country usually has been celebrating its heroes since 1947. We have seen how Nishan-e-Haider became an emblem for every child. When I was growing up, I think that there was no greater motivation for me or my generation than the idea of sacrifices which actually lead to getting a Nishan-e-Haider, which is the highest military award awarded in this country. And their heroes, they were always deified, who were always celebrated. In the war on terror, initially we saw that there was confusion, but after 2014, when the terrorists attacked our kids, at that time I think that was a crystallizing, clarifying moment, because then all conspiracy theorists actually were exposed, and we knew who's killing our people, who is killing our heroes, and then we started celebrating our heroes with full vigor. It continued until General Bajwa actually took over, and then it was merged with Pakistan Defence Day. But this event was very important. It is a constant reminder of the families of the martyrs that we haven't forgotten their sacrifice. Sana, somehow in modern age, it seems that we are desensitized to the idea of losing human life. But if the person who is sacrificing so bravely his life for the sake of motherland, if that person belongs to your family or somebody who used to, whom you are going to miss in your daily life, that becomes something else. And I ask everybody who knows somebody whose family has gone through this sacrifice, or who have actually rendered one of their valuable family member's life in the fight against terrorism or for the security of this nation, to go and talk to them. You will be astonished that the pain, the kind of trauma, it never goes away, Sana. And then we see these vandals, these brutes on May 9th actually desecrating, the emblems of national pride. So I think it is about time that we actually revive this tradition of celebrating our heroes and martyrs and pay homage to them, and we continue to remember what their sacrifices have meant for us. Because today, if we are sitting here comfortably, there was a time when it seemed that this country is going to be swarmed by terrorists, and because we could not actually acknowledge our heroes and we could not actually call out our enemies. But because of these heroes and their sacrifices, the tide turned, and today we live in a country where we can freely talk about things, we can move about without the fear of losing our lives or our bodies. So I think that this is about time that we actually paid this homage, right?
Absolutely, and that is, of course, extremely important. And we hope that whatever it is that has hurt the sentiments of the families of the martyrs, they're able to understand that the nation stands with them, and the nation has always valued the martyrs and will continue to do so, and that we are standing by them, and we of course feel their pain, and we all have felt the way that the desecration of the martyrs' monuments on the 9th of May have hurt the sentiments, and that's something that is echoed throughout the country. We're now also going to be taking a look at the economic situation of the country, which is extremely important in terms of the way that the current political and economic crisis seems to unfold within the nation. And it's important for us to, of course, understand where exactly do we stand today. For this, we've also been joined by Dr. Khaqan Najib, who's a senior economic expert. Thank you very much, Dr. Khaqan, for being with us and being a part of the debate, as always. First of all, I'd like to understand, because we keep on talking about how the IMF bailout package is stored, and at some point or the other, there were different conditions coming in as to what really is the reason behind it. There is, of course, political uncertainty that is something that is being quoted typically across the board. But in terms of where we are now, the kind of conditions that have already been fulfilled, and the way that bilateral engagements and reassurances from other countries have also been obtained, are we anywhere nearer to securing the IMF package than we were before?
Sana and Patafi Saab, good to be with you guys as always. Sana, I'm going to take a minute and say a few things about the first topic that you were discussing. The reason I'm taking that liberty is that I come from a very, very strong defense background. Both my parents have served the army for decades. And you know, I have met the martyrs, I've seen the martyrs, they've been part and parcel, they've been family to us. And it is very, very difficult to understand the household or what goes on in a martyr's house when the children have to live without their father. It is almost an impossible situation. So to remember them, the army is not only the top brass that we see. The army, the navy is not the top brass that we see, or the air force. My parents have been part of the top brass, but there are all the Jawans who fight for us day in and day out. So to remember them, and especially those, it is something which gives them comfort, and that's all we can do, because we can't bring their fathers back. So I echo that sentiment. And being in a geostrategic location, the geopolitical location that we are in, and being a Muslim country, one is proud to have a strong defense forces. And the Pulwama incident and the other incidents have shown to us that time and again they have protected the sovereignty of the country. From that, I think now what is equally important is for us to know that economic independence and economic sovereignty and economic strength is something that we are searching for, but we have not been able to build in that way. We have had to go to the IMF a number of times. That is not a good scenario. Our neighbor India went to IMF and then did some reforms which helped them get out. We have had to go to the IMF a number of times, and this time is no different. But I think this time what is different is that our need is much, much more, because the political uncertainty, the economic conditions of the world, and the economic instability within the country. These three combined are creating, a kind of a perfect storm for Pakistan. Neither the economic uncertainty is going away. Political uncertainty is going to be there till we have an election and all those things get sorted out. And the world is also slowing down, Sana. So in this, having IMF as an anchor, I've always felt was the best course of action. Pakistan, Sana, was lucky that when we came out of COVID, we were already in an IMF program. The countries Bangladesh, Ghana, and Sri Lanka had to go to the IMF much later. Sri Lanka defaulted and then went to the IMF. Pakistan had IMF as an anchor, and the PDM government, when it did the 7th and the 8th review on August 29th, I think I was of the hope that things had stabilized to some extent. And from here onwards, we'd build our reserves. But then, as the finance minister today duly noted himself, that 3rd November, when the review was to start, the delay has caused irreparable damage to not only the real economy, whether that's our GDP growth, whether that's our economic production, the large scale manufacturing, the service sector, the exports, but also to the fact that the confidence has been shattered, and that's why you see pressure on the rupee, the kind of inflation. So, this is harsh. Part of it must be our own doing, because there is a recipient country. Pakistan is a recipient country. We probably had to delay some of the reforms, whether it was, putting the 170 billion rupees of taxes and the others. But today, where we stand, and because this program is in English, I have no hesitation in saying that the incumbent government has done fairly more than its share of the possible that could be done, given where Pakistan is in an economic and a political cycle. I think it is time for the 9th review to be completed. Otherwise, the pain would just continue on the 245 million people of Pakistan who are facing high inflation because the rupee is weakening against the dollar or other currencies. So the imported inflation component is much higher. Once I think the IMF comes on board, some flows would happen automatically. The World Bank, the ADB, and the commercial loans, I think to the tune of 3 billion that we have returned, would come back. Right now, I can understand the commercial banks are facing a hard time renewing those facilities which we have returned. Normally, we do get these back. It is not a great thing to keep getting debt, but right now, whatever we are looking at is a dollar liquidity crunch. In that, giving away and bringing the reserves down to this level is uncomfortable for any country. So, in the short term, this liquidity crisis, the doctor is the IMF. And Patafi Saab, the most important factor is that this is the international architecture today. This is not a new thing that anyone is asking either of the IMF or of Pakistan. A balance of payments challenge, a liquidity crisis, IMF as the doctor to get the pricing changes and sail us through this part, and then for us to do the real reform. I think that is where the whole scenario is. My only concern here, which I want to point out, is that 30th of June is the last day of the current program. Either we ask for an extension, or the 10th or the 11th review will be difficult to complete.
Dr. Khaqan, I'll come back to that and talk more about what's going to happen with regards to this deadline. But Farrukh, of course, there's talks of a default going on once again, and there are a lot of experts who keep on talking about how Pakistan will default if the IMF bailout package isn't there, and with the way that the situation is deteriorating, especially in terms of the rupee value. But then the finance minister is pretty confident that Pakistan will be able to pay back all of its debt obligations and is not in a position where it will go to default. How accurate do you think that this conversation around default is at the moment, and whether realistically this is a threat that we should be concerned about?
Right, Sana. Today we were, like you, I was also listening to the finance minister, and particularly one thing was clear. He has repeatedly said that the country is not going to default and it will actually keep on paying back, and that is invariably exactly what has happened so far. But having said that, there was this concern that if IMF actually comes on board, we will get the clean bill of health, and after that so many other inflows will be ensured, as Dr. Saab was also pointing out. But there is another concern as well. IMF used to be essentially an economic tool, right? Now it seems that of late it has become a tool of realpolitik also. For example, you have seen that Bangladesh recently negotiated a package with IMF, despite having a lot of foreign currency reserves. At that time, the sticking point was essentially this economic deal with Adani Group, right? That coal-produced electricity within India will be exported to Bangladesh. and that was at really high prices. So IMF went and helped them actually to convince them actually to pass it on to the common man on the street. Similarly, in Sri Lanka also, while there's no solace that has been given to them, we saw that in the meanwhile, the negotiations regarding Colombo port that was eventually acquired by once again Adani, that was also that took place under the this shadow of a possibility of IMF coming to the rescue. So I think that at this moment it seems that IMF is essentially pushing one kind of world order all over the world. And in Pakistan, then there was this issue as well that perhaps Donald Trump's holdovers have actually dominated the policy circles of IMF, and that's why it is going to become difficult for Pakistan to get any relief if Imran Khan Sahib is not returned to power, because he's thought to be the logical, ally of Donald Trump. But then we have seen something else. I think after May 9th, circumstances seem to have shifted. There was prediction of Pakistan's collapse. There were people not only talking about Pakistan defaulting, but there were others who were thinking that Pakistan as a country might fall. From Mike Rubin to Indian journalist and analyst also, they kept on doing it. But on May 9th, what has happened is that all those doubts have actually been flushed out, because whatever worst could be possible came and went away. So I think there's a better chance now that Pakistan can get some kind of relief. I don't know whether IMF will be willing at this moment, because their demands are astounding. Their MD keeps on talking about not taxing the poor, but taxing the privileged elite. But when you talk about the program, the way they actually push you to keep on, hiking prices and then cutting, back subsidies even to the poor. And remember that petroleum subsidy issue became an issue as well. Because of that, one would think that IMF itself is at loggerheads with its own policy or leadership. So with that kind of a power politics going on within IMF, I think that there are chances that one of our allied countries might bring in a big investment package bonanza. If that happens, I think things will improve. But I'm not very optimistic so far about IMF.
All right. Dr. Hakan, there's of course a lot of input coming in from different quarters, and of course various economic experts keep on talking about it. We also saw a series of tweets by Mr. Atif as well, who has spoken about what the situation is like in Sri Lanka and Ghana, and how just because we haven't defaulted, it perhaps is not a cause of celebration enough for us, because the situation is deteriorating, the currency is devaluing, and also that the policies are not pointing towards the right direction. As an example, he also talks about the high petrol prices, which have had a negative impact on the GDP. What do you make of that in terms of what you were earlier talking about, how the government has done its best? I can understand these are tough decisions to make, but do you think that there could be better policy decisions?
So two things. Let's look at Sri Lanka for starters. So if you go back to Sri Lanka, you would see that in February, their currency was at about 364 Sri Lankan rupee to a dollar. Come March, they have a board approval, and their currency is about 340. Today, it's strengthened to about 304 as we talked to you. I was just looking at the graph. This inherently is the point that I've been trying to make, that IMF will give you that comfort, give the world that comfort, would improve the speculation that is taking place, take away the part of it, build the dollar reserves, so that this stability, and Atif also talks about it, will come in the short term at least. And in the short term, at least, this was the best way to stabilize. Number two, this is also something I've been saying in your programs, that default is one issue. Usually we go to the IMF to slow the economy, to create a stability. Today, we are going to the IMF to unclog the economy. This is very interesting, right? Let's say your reserves had been built to about 8-9 billion with the IMF flows in December, with the World Bank flows, the $2 billion from Saudi Arabia, a billion from UAE, and other investments that Patafi Saab was hinting at. And let's say we were somewhere at $7-8 billion of reserves, we would have actually eased the administrative hold on the imports. Our imports would be back again to $4-4.5 billion. Just imagine the unclogging of the economy that would transpire. The large scale manufacturing not contracting to that level. The dollar actually, moving both ways versus the rupee. Rupee would probably strengthen a bit from here. The imported inflation would probably be at a much lower level than we are seeing. The supply chains would improve so that inflation would be more in control. And lastly, what the State Bank mentions, the inflationary expectations would be lower. So what I'm trying to say is right now the unclogging of the economy is dependent on our having been with the IMF. And that's the kind of stabilization that you see in Sri Lanka in particular that's happening. So, so much for that. Now, Pakistan's options, Sana, I mean, one, I think if we are able to secure the ninth review, let me take the finance minister on face value. If he has said that we are still a bit hopeful, IMF has not disengaged. That's another hope that is there. Well and good. Otherwise, I think we will keep drifting the way we are. Chinese would keep supporting us if there is any other investment that comes into the country. And you'll, go past the June and July situation. 15th of August is probably the time where either this government will constitutionally cease to hold office and you will be looking at an interim setup. And if that is to happen, for example, then you would be seeing a new negotiation with the IMF for a new program because 30th of June this program finishes. So, that's the kind of scenario I think that we are looking at. Within that, we will see a budget. I don't think it will be a great relief budget because there is not much space. It will be more of a hopingly a more responsible budget. And in 1.5 months, it's not even possible to pass on a big relief to the people of Pakistan. And if things work out this way, then you will see an interim setup. You'd have to start thinking about the contours of another program with the IMF and so on and so forth. Within this, I think the friends, especially China, in my opinion, has helped, would help more in the next month and so on. And so we will keep drifting the way we are, hopefully not too on the reserve, not too low on the reserves position, so that the pressure on the rupee is not, unbearable for the economy.
Farooq, I understand what Dr. Khaqan is mentioning in terms of how the IMF package will help us unclog things. But in terms of, despite where we are today and without the IMF package, do you think that currently also there are policy decisions that can be taken that should help in this direction? Also, perhaps in terms of what should have been done in the many negotiations we've had over the IMF where certain concessions were made. And secondly, with reference to the budget that is expected to be announced in June, how will that conversation then factor in with the current negotiations that are going on with the IMF, because it seems that this is also something that they're all making part of the negotiations.
Right, Sana. One thing that one has to first of all point out is that today again the finance minister was also talking about the only time Pakistan successfully completed an IMF program, and that was back in 2013-14. And I just wanted to remind everybody that somebody who joins us now, Dr. Khaqan Najib, actually was spearheading the technical side of our team, right? And he managed to do it. So I totally get why he still has hope, because he is a doer. He has achieved these things in the past. But my concern is that there is very little runway left. I mean, just consider, we started talking about another program since November, and this is end of May. And June, by the end of June, the program actually comes to a sunset, comes to a close. So how quickly can we actually agree on things? I seriously have my concerns. You know, regarding how much IMF has changed since the last time we went for the conclusion of this program is shown by the fact that last time Ishaq Dar Saab and IMF really seemed to actually rhyme and work together. And this time it seems that both of them cannot work together, right? Because in the past, whosoever finance minister was, we kept on getting these tranches no matter what. But since he came, we were asked to actually front load everything and first meet all the demands. And then there was this ridiculous demand of actually ensuring and then getting in writing all the fiscal commitments or investment commitments by other countries that were there. We still have to actually manage the manage the entire fiscal gap. I don't know whether we are there yet. But my concern right now is that there seems to be some serious disconnect between Dar Saab and IMF. I don't know whether it is because of our recent history that we kept on changing our finance minister like clothes, or it is something else. Having said this, regarding budgets, Sana, if you remember when this government came, and at that time we came up with a budget immediately. If you look at the kind of fiscal deficit we were talking about, it was humongous. It seemed that we are talking about half a budget as the fiscal deficit, right? Right now also, bear in mind that we are a country that has gone through so many shocks to the system. On one side, first it was COVID, although we got a comfortable cooperative kind of attitude from IMF during COVID, but even then it was a big shock to the system. After that, we have seen this global super cycle that does not seem to abate. And finally, we have started seeing this impact of floods as well, when a huge part of our crops were destroyed, our infrastructure was destroyed, and still in many parts of the country we haven't been able to restore normalcy to people and their lives. So with that kind of situation, do you think that we are going to expect something magical from the budget? Not possible. Exactly what Dr. Saab was saying. But do we expect that we can balance books? I think we can balance books, but then we will still have to be very, very much focused on fiscal belt tightening. Otherwise, we are going to have a big number of fiscal deficit, and even that is going to impact the country further. What I was referring to, I don't know which country is bringing in the kind of financial bonanza we are talking about, but I'm told that there is one country particularly that intends to go for a huge package of investment in Pakistan, and if that comes
without the IMF package,
without IMF package, because it is going to be investment. It is not going to be bailout money like we actually get from financial support from certain countries. If that happens, we might actually be able to balance books more comfortably, and then of course take care of the foreign commitments as well. But until that comes, everything is too in the bush.
Okay. Dr. Haqqan, with reference to, of course, the options that Pakistan has without the IMF, also then something that Farooq is also referring to. But irrespective of that, when we take a look at the scenario, and of course there is very limited timeline, and hopefully we'll be able to get the package. But if not, do you think that the government has a plan B in how to proceed forward? Are we going to be relying on other countries and potential investments that can come into the country? Is that the way that we expect to move forward? Because the finance minister also keeps on saying that with or without the IMF, Pakistan will not default.
So, Sana, a number of important points have come out of our discussion. One, that IMF is the best option. But let's say it was not to happen, the time period is limited, then we should be looking at the friendly countries. That's our second best option. Of course, I think China is number one. There's an investment that Farooq Saab is mentioning. I am delighted to learn that. But again, the time period of the investment becomes very important because investments take time. I remember being on the table when His Royal Highness visited from Saudi Arabia and wanted to set up a refinery. This was 19. Today I'm talking to you in 23, and there is no great hope that we still are going to be able to do it. So in the short term, we need all these monies to come in. About $3.7 billion are to be repaid by Pakistan till 30th of June. China will roll over $1 billion in that. I think another billion of refinancing from China. Some would go back, so there will be a bit of pressure on the reserves, and $400 million of markup after that has to be paid. So I'm still, hopeful that some monies have to flow in from somewhere, and Saudi Arabia or UAE or Qatar, some flows would come in so that our reserves don't fall to an uncomfortable. Um, the main decisions that should come in now that the government can do are through the budget. The right word that he used, Batafisa, is that the best they can do is have a very, very responsible budget fiscally. If the fiscal responsibility is there, it would help in inflation. The greatest tax, greatest burden on the people of Pakistan who are in low income, who are middle income, or the vulnerable is the inflationary pressure. So if they present a budget which is fiscally responsible and does something on the expenditure side, I mean, cuts on the subsidies to the fertilizer, gas, power, um, other plants. That's something they can do. Direct those subsidies through the income support. I think the income support from 350 should go to 500. That would be the minimum figure I should be looking at. Increase the minimum wage to about 30 to 35,000, so that there is a burst in people's pockets, so that all of us who have industry or who have domestic help or who have commercial ventures are able to do the same thing. The third relief that we can do to these people is in terms of improving on pensions as well as the monies that we give to the federal employees. These are, some quick measures I think that could be. But on the other hand, some measures have to come through to see that, there are so many federal subjects which are no more federal in nature. And I've always said, health, education, population planning, even climate, zakat, and OSHR, these are all subjects that have gone to the province. And after the NFC, we have given them so much money, so much money. 60% goes to the province. These subjects should be transferred, and a lot of savings should come on the federal side, both in the current spending as well as in the development spending. So that is something the government should at least, show guidance that this is the future of Pakistan. The world is looking for signals from us also. Even if we were to show some kind of guidance there, then the pensions burden, Patafi Saab, 600 billion rupees today, 6 years ago, 250 billion. Think about it, if this was to continue and run into 800 billion in the coming years, it would become unbearable for us. So something on that. So what I'm trying to say is where we are starting from, the base is very big to have an impact in the coming years. And that is the kind of reforms that we should start to do, because we spend so much time firefighting or the IMF or the banks, that we forget that all these things are for us to do. And that is where the fiscal responsibility will come through. And in some years, hopefully, we would see all this expenditure rationalization rather than just a burden on the tax.
Right, right.
Right, and Farooq, I want to talk about that because whenever we talk about the kind of important measures that need to be taken, they seem, of course, to be pointing towards the right direction, and they point towards the very important variables that they impact. But again, that begs the question whether or not that is going to be possible in terms of the kind of political instability that we see in the country, and whether or not anybody is willing or capable of making those decisions and is going to do that in the coming future for that to actually happen. Whenever we talk about these indicators or factors, then do you think that they somehow lose their weightage a little bit in light of the political instability, or do you think that despite that, if these measures are taken, there will be some sort of respite?
Right, Sana. But before I actually come to your question, I wanted to actually go back to the finance minister's assurance that the country is not going to default.
Yeah.
It is like yours truly is lying in ICU, and every day you go or you come and visit me, and doctor gives you good news that I'm not going to die, right? That might be okay news, but it is not.
And it
great.
might be true, but
Yeah, it might be true as well, and it might be. I mean, at least it is not the worst, but it where we are at is next to the worst possible, right?
Yeah.
Despite the fact that at this moment, and this is true, that we have after quite some time achieved current account surplus rather than deficit, which is good. But then the concern regarding the state of affairs, Dr. Saab was talking about fiscal responsibility, particularly straightening our spending, architecture, and this doubling that continues between center and provinces. But then the counter argument that I get, Dr. Saab, is that the total, sum that is spent on the civilian side, and even when you talk about defense expenditure, that is also limited. But on the civilian side is not much. The biggest expenditure is debt retirement, and that becomes a problem because then no matter what you do without reprofiling of our loans, we might not be able to get the kind of breather that we need. And right now, Sana, the biggest problem at this moment is, and I'm amazed, this country kept on changing, as I mentioned, the economic team, finance team, like clothes every other day. And then suddenly it seems that we have stopped somewhere. Just recently, in the past 1 week, I think that we saw change of finance secretary. But for a long time, we saw that we are continuing with the same team that might not be delivering the kind of results we needed. The finance minister says that we are going to surprise IMF by meeting the targets, beyond their expectation, and I'm very open to that. But then what Dr. Saab was saying, that inflation and the value of rupee keeps on declining. Remember, you and I'm hoping that Dr. Saab is affluent, but you and I are people who earn, and especially me, who actually has to manage from paycheck to paycheck, are actually witnessing the incredible decline of life quality.
Right.
I mean, it is like consistently, sinking into quicksand, where your ability to purchase things goes away within 3 days or 4 days of your salary. And this is happening all over the country. So we want to have hope, but there has to be hope as well. Regarding what you were asking,
Yes,
simple thing is simple, one liner.
Yes.
There is no longer any political instability, because one agent of that instability has actually self-destructed. And
Okay.
after that, only problem is going to be caretaker setup. But after that or before that, I don't think there's going to be any instability or uncertainty.
All right. Thank you, Farooq. Thank you very much, Dr. Haqqan Najib, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.